Kia ora and welcome to the Happy Revolution podcast. My name is Mika and I'm studying history, law and politics. I'm here with my co-host Matthew, a Christian chaplain at Victoria University. Today we're talking to Emily Beausoleil.
Emily's a political theorist here at Te Herenga Waka. She researches and teaches in deliberative democracy, post-colonial theory and active citizenship, among other areas. She helped design the Tauiwi Tautoko anti-racism program.
Emily talks with us about democracy, deliberation, listening, theatre, decolonising and te tiriti, and how to be an engaged citizen. Well, to start with, do you mind telling us a bit about yourself, how long you've been at Vic, and what inspired you to get into political science?
I've been at Te Herenga Waka since 2019, and before that I was at Massey for a few years, since 2013. And before that, I was on Coast Salish territory where I did my PhD in Western Canada. And that's where I was born and raised as well as living overseas at various stints. It was always coming back to Musqueam and Comox territory. And why did I go into political theory? Yeah, political science, that word science. We are in political theory, humanities housed in a social science. And a lot of that means often that we, as a field, it's the place of norms and values. It's the place where we explicitly ask, how should we live? Whereas all the other social science approaches are really saying, what is the world? We're saying, what should the world be? So it really is a philosophical field. And I was drawn to that because that's just the most core question to me of how to live. But actually, I went initially into English literature because of their careful, incredible attunement to the particularities of existence and the care for that. So unpacking to such a degree the subtleties of human character and, trajectory and meaning and so on. But continually, especially in post-colonial literature and African-American literature and so on, there was this question that was never asked, which is, well, what do we do about that? What do we do? And so I had to switch. I was like, well, thank you. Thank you for showing me how subtle and nuanced and deep, complex the world is and can be in the context of scholarship, but I need to ask a different question. So that's why I moved back into political theory, because I needed to ask that question.
How did you end up at Te Herenga Waka in particular?
My journey, so I came to Massey because there aren't a lot of positions in the world for political theorists. And specifically, my beginning and my roots are really in studying artistic performance as a site of politics, and particularly the aesthetics by which we meet across profound difference and inequality. That's what I study, and I was really looking at performance, theatre and dance and so on as sites where that's happening in particular ways. And who even thinks about that as political theory? So finding a home where that would value the thing that I'm most curious and passionate about was, of course, an uncertain question. And they had a position at Massey. My partner's sister works there in animal welfare. So I just dug into the university. They happened to want a theorist, which is a miracle. There were 17 positions around the world the year I graduated. And they wanted me. So I came over. We were traveling. I think I was in Indonesia at the time, and came over for an interview. One little package in a waterproof kayaking bag with one outfit for interviews at the bottom of a big backpack, ironed it out, came over, did my interview, got back on a plane, and came to New Zealand because of that. And my partner being from Aotearoa, New Zealand originally, that was also a draw. But coming here, it was because of Wellington. It was because of studying art and culture as politics. It was the vibrancy of the city. It was actually being by the ocean. The moment that I was walking Breaker Bay with our dog, that was the moment when I was like, this can be forever. This is a home. This is a place to stand. So it's something about being next to the ocean, wherever it is, that feels very home-like. So that was very orienting for me. So lots of reasons to come to Wellington. And this, of all the places to be doing politics, again, it was because someone left and there was a position, which is always a miracle when there's a space for you. But particularly, I think about being able to teach politics here, and I think, get a room of 300 students, and every possible future civil and political leader is probably in that room across the political spectrum, and you get this rare, precious time in these early years to say, well, what is the world, and what could the world be, and what counts as politics, and what's your vocabulary for analyzing and navigating that world? So that journey, and especially that's where we begin, in these vast rooms where we begin that conversation, but then I developed a course when I first came on, I don't know if you took it, but it was on, it's on repertoires of everyday, what forms of action that everyday people can take to address structural injustice. So we talk about what structural injustice is, how it works around climate change and socioeconomic inequality, settler colonialism, and then we say, well, here are 10 genres of action that everyday folk are taking very effectively and powerfully, but with particular conditions and requirements to actually make real change, to have that sense of agency, which is, I think, deeply connected, to your theme of saying, well, what could we do? We see the vastness of the problem. What could we do? So being able to be part of their journey is just a gift. Being able to see them carry on through the years after we've had that time together is such a gift, to watch what they're doing in the world in their own way. And actually, it's funny being in this room surrounded by, the reason why it's a little bit personal is my father's a minister. He used to be a minister, and then he went into international development. But I grew up in a home full of books like this, and certainly with frameworks like this about making sense of the world. And I said to my father the other day, I said, oh, Dad, I don't think you understand how much I'm your child. So you went around and you said, this is the way, this is the way, this is the way. And I said, I go into a room and in the same passion, same sense of drive and purpose, I say, there are many ways, there are many ways. And the job is to try to enable and empower and give vocabulary to be able to find your own way, and that's the gift of what it is to be able to teach in this place.
That's so interesting about the connection with your father. What did you sort of get from him?
I was thinking about, there was a social movements conference a couple of years ago, and I ran a session with a group of people from Tauiwimu Matike Mai, which is a group that I work with, on Pakeatanga. So what's the work that Pakeha have to do together with each other to clean ourselves up and get ready and become in better in the treaty relationship in a decolonizing world. And one of the questions we asked the group, and I found it a really powerful one to think about, is what's some value that you grew up with that serves you in this work? And I thought of my father, and I thought it's humility. So the sense of there's always something to learn, and how can you be of service, but to be useful, but decentered at the same time? So that orientation has been really a gift from him. Being the last shall be first was such a strong orientation in the home. And so that sense of, quietly, without pronouncing oneself, trying to find a way to be of purpose in this unjust world.
There was some words that floated past that I'm trying to remember. One was, you mentioned a decolonising world. Can you talk about, I hear that word a lot, but not very clear about what's meant by decolonising.
I came, as I said, in 2013, and I come from the same lineage and continuities of ongoing settler colonialism in Canada. So those are my people, and that's my work as well. But it's something about being here that's just completely clarified, not that I'm clear, but it has been a process of clarification, deepening, activating around that. And I guess I understand more than I did, and have a long way to go of realizing where I am, the context in which we are all living and working and breathing and making lives. And what through the process of the years of being here, I've been radically changed, actually, in the context of understanding the context in which I am in as an ongoing colonizing context, and the work that I am part of in terms of having a responsibility to address that as a vocation, as purpose. But I came in 2013. It was interesting because I thought, I'm just new to the game and I'm just catching up. And of course that's true. But I think something particular has happened in this place in the last 5 to 10 years, even the last 5 years, watching cohorts of students change, for example. And there's something like this burning, healthy fire that's happening. It feels like that something is changing quite quickly, that there's the Overton window is shifting a little, that there's certain things being normalized. We're being able to talk about certain dynamics and histories and inheritances in a new way, even the use of te reo, of course, and other things that come with that. So I think the whole context we're in is becoming more visible. When I think about, what was I going to say? So I think there's something happening in particular right now, but it's indebted to, centuries of struggle. Decolonizing has different kinds of work involved. In my thinking right off the cuff, I'm thinking about Te Tiriti is a really great affirmation of a decolonial world, where we actually have, in the preamble, it discusses it's about peaceful coexistence. And that's about recognizing and respecting one another's authority to self-govern while coexisting in this place. It's such a beautiful blueprint of how we can live together in sharing power and in balance. And I think about one of the metaphors that, from Heather Kame that really inspires me is the spread of invasive species, and the work of decolonization is actually about cutting back the invasive, thoughtless spread of what invades. And so that's a great way to think about it. So there was this beautiful balance that was envisioned in Te Tiriti, which is really just affirming mana motuhake, which precedes Te Tiriti, and he whakaputanga as well. And then there was this, right from 1841, an overstepping, an invasion, a spread, and thoughtless to the point so dominant that you don't even see the spread yourself. It's just the world we're in. And so there's this, this absolute imbalance that's come of that. And so the work is really about, what Heather Kame would say, it's about cutting back, what's like clearing the gorse, clear the gorse, clear the gorse. And that's decolonization. And alongside that is indigenization, which is not my work. It's not the work of non-Māori to do. But that's where the flourishing of indigeneity here, which is the twin partner of decolonization. So in my as Pākehā, as someone who's coming from outside of European descent, I would be part of that work of clearing the gorse. But I see that as a really, like, everyone is healed in that work. So it's not just about negating, and it's not just about disappearing. It's also about what do you offer, again, in a decentered way to that project. And what I've ended up doing a lot more in that zone is thinking, like, what's our lane? What's our work? What's the particular work that my people and my inheritance calls me to? And it's clearing the gorse, yes, where we're thoughtlessly invading, but there's also this internal work of when we're able to work together as a people and say, well, who are we? What are our stories of migration and inheritance? How have we shaped the world and been shaped by that world? What are we therefore responsible for in terms of changing that? But there's about a self-understanding that's necessary too, a collective understanding that's necessary, a collective ownership of history, and being able to get ready to meet, that comes from actually a clarification and a deepening of understanding. So it's not just about erasure and disappearing. It's actually saying, well, who are we? Well, why are we here? What lies behind us? And therefore, how do we come in? Why are we here? When we meet, what are we meeting with, and why? One of the things that transformed how I think about this, sorry to go on, but there's so many, you such a massive question, you jerk. It was such a big question. But what is decolonial? Anyway, as a white woman, such a fraught terrain to try to play with, but it's definitely alive for me as a question. But one of the things that changed how I think about where I am in this place was a particular, it's always been when I've fallen on my face and realized how little I know. So that I'm so grateful for and deeply sad, apologetic for, but deeply indebted to those moments of really vast mistake and error and learning. And one of them was particularly, I learned for several years, 2 years, with the Rongawhakata iwi, someone who's working there, Tēnā Mōtara and his partner, Ngāpaki Mōtara. And they're theatre artists, and they also were running a tikanga training for a few years up there. And years and years they've done this. And you go 4 weekends, and you spend 4 weekends up there at different marae. And there was this epiphany for me. So we were learning the protocol sequence by which the mana whenua actually will greet whoever comes at the gate. It could be an enemy. It could be someone who needs help. It could be someone with something to teach or give. The whole sequence is set up as a read and response mechanism so that you know who is coming and why they're here, and therefore how to meet them. Every step of the way is this read and response system. And it's, there's so many steps in the sequence. I think there's something like 13 or 14 in the Rongawhakata context. And we were all standing in the wharekai, taking on the role of one of the steps of the sequence. And I was staying at Whai Korero, which is like on the pai, and just thinking that's where I want to work. Choose somewhere today that you want to work. We'll just do a quick review of what the sequence is. And one from our group opted to be in role, to say, I'm going to come to the gate, and then we're going to kind of refresh our understanding by playing out these roles. And the person at the gate refused. They came in such a way that they said, I have a checklist. I don't know. Who sent you? I don't know. The sort of vague government figure, not really naming themselves, not really declaring themselves, not really committing to being present, not ready to meet. And the first person, so that's the waharoa, and all of us are lined up in the back, and there's someone who comes up in the role of matataki, and their matataki is there to be like, figure out who's there and see if they're ready, and also make sure they're ready. And so they go to the gate and enroll, saying, well, who are you? Why are you here? And I don't know. This person is being so difficult. And all of us, I was certainly getting restless and impatient and wanting to do my bid and wanting to think about the whole sequence and get on to the next thing. And we took an hour and a half of this person refusing to meet. And that person, who was initially the matataki, traded out with someone else. It happened again. It happened again. No one could get them to actually declare who they were. And against all of my impulses to hold the whole sequence in my mind at once, or to rush, skip over that and go to the next step, have any kind of time constraint, our instructor said, this is really important learning. So you're going to meet people who aren't ready to meet. The quality of what happens in the very back of the house by the post-colonial only is by virtue of what happens out here. And you cannot rush it, and you cannot predict, and you just have to be with what's there and then move to the next step. And what that came of that learning is this work of waharua that needs to happen before we even meet. And the work of waharua, and in a physical sense, you gather at the gate and you get your bodies ready and you kind of get to be able to enter. But on a deeper level, it's about collectively who is coming, knowing who you are and why you're there. And if you don't do that work, you don't ever actually meet. We could be doing this, and we wouldn't actually be meeting, not in the sense of this tikanga. And I was thinking, my people never do that work. We never do the work of gathering ourselves and understanding who we are and why we're here. And we're actually never meeting as a result in the context of this place. And I thought, that's the work. We've got a piece of work there that's really clear. So that for me, sorry, I've gone on and on, but you're just touching. Of course, I live. This is what I think about an awful lot, and this is the work that I've been doing too with the different projects I've got running. But it's this sense of, okay, well, that's a really clear challenge to say, gather yourselves, as part of the work of clearing the gorse. Gather yourselves, get yourselves ready. Get firm, tone the muscles around who we are and why we're here. Know your migration stories, know the stories of the land on which you live and how it came to be in your possession. Get clear on what lies behind you. What are your inheritances of how your thinking has been shaped, your blind spots have been shaped, your habits and dispositions shaped by being the dominant people in this place over centuries. How do you come in that way? So we're just never, this work of getting ready, the fact that we've never been meeting all this time, it was such an epiphany for me. And I just realized I just come from a people that doesn't even know it's a people, that doesn't even think of itself. We're just individuals, I just am a master of my own fate. And we're, how stuck we are in the context of these issues without understanding ourselves collectively in that way. So that's a big piece of the project, I think, of decolonization.
Thank you. I don't know if it's a false analogy or not, but it reminds me, or the picture that came to me is of kind of the modernist thing where you get rid of ornament, you get rid of, picture frames get simpler and simpler and simpler and disappear entirely. Where the picture you're drawing there is like there's a big picture frame, and there's quite a big ornate distance in a sense between the outside and the inside, and you go through a very defined process. But maybe across culture we're kind of stripped out. And maybe in Pākehā land, we've stripped out a lot of the kind of intermediate ornamentation or things that feel like ornament, maybe, and stripped it away.
Do you mean ritual?
Yeah.
Or process?
Any of that, I suppose.
Yeah, like how you begin a meeting,
like
right?
You're saying, we're just individuals, just isolated people.
Yeah. That's one of the attributes of being dominant, too. So that's actually cultural, because of history and culture, we don't feel we have history and culture. So it's really a particular ground. And one thing that was also very eye-opening to me was not everyone wants to be nowhere. And I realized that our Western philosophical tradition, I point at Mika because we study this together, from Plato is the first time you see it in text. Of course, he's the first philosopher to write things down. But in the Western tradition, but he was the first to also say, to truly know and to truly be fulfilled and free in all the things that are very much a part of the Western tradition, you have to escape your circumstances. You have to see universally from nowhere, to have this God's eye vision, total and transparent vision, while being off the hook, invisible to yourself. And that universalist view, that desire for that vision, the idea that is possible or desired, is really culturally specific. It's part of our tradition. But it keeps us from meeting, it keeps us from seeing ourselves, actually. So yeah, it's funny, it is a cultural accent on the world, but we can't discern it as such. Yeah.
We do get some nice things from that universal view. I'm thinking of like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights seems like a product of that kind of universalizing view from nowhere.
Yeah, it's not from nowhere though, is it? At least, depending on where it's coming from, I was thinking about the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, right? So you've got absolutely grounded in lived experience and struggle and epistemology, and but noticing the connections and noticing the parallel of the struggles and noticing some shared constraints in the world against what one is seeking for self-determination, for example. So there's a way to come together in coalition without requiring us to all have a single unified vision. Yeah, so I think, universals. I think it's also, maybe it's not about throwing everything out. This is the thing about not disappearing or thinking this is about erasure. I think it's noticing our cultural difference, noticing our historical and cultural inheritance, and then deciding how to, being able to bring it alongside others and say, well, let's meet. I own the ground on which we meet. Let's meet. So it sometimes is useful. Like one of the Indigenous scholars that I've worked with very fortunately is the Kawiho Hoskins in Auckland University. And I was sharing this metaphor of clearing the gorse, and she she's very subtle as a thinker, and nothing is ever one thing. And that is the problem with the clearing the gorse metaphor, is it seems to be this decisive negation. But it's, she said, sometimes gorse can house other plants, She's like, there's many, it's mainly, it's like, what do you offer? But know that ground, both in terms of the responsibilities and things to be worked out, and also what you offer, what's beautiful, like that question about what values that are part of your tradition that serve you in this work that we were given. I love that question. It's like, we have something to offer as well. And universalism. And I think she said that too about efficiency. I said, well, yeah, there's such a Pakeha trait to be like about time and efficiency, etc. She said, sometimes that's helpful, so it's a matter of knowing what your difference is and then knowing how to bring it with humility in alignment alongside others, but particularly in the context of ongoing tino rangatiratanga in this place. So there's this absolute overstretching and invasion of those cultural differences, of those people, our people, and how to rein that in and then try to find different ways to be in relation. Yeah, so it's not about not. Yeah, does that make sense?
Entirely it does.
Okay.
I've been totally dominating questions. I'm sorry, Mika, because it's so interesting.
No, that's all good. I wanted to ask about democracy, and perhaps connected to some of the stuff that you've talked about with decolonisation. What are some standout issues that you see in democracy as a system in New Zealand, but then also more sort of broadly and generally?
Before I came here, the main, and I think when I was talking about citizen action earlier, you can probably hear it, is I really get excited about the politics of the everyday, how we constitute the world, absolutely everything beyond and besides and underneath what happens in the beehive. And so it's really all the work I do is about how to meet across difference and inequality, and how we do that better or worse, and what tools do we have at the ready or maybe less known. And in the context of that, I really like a citizen as protagonist. Like, what is it for us? In the face of systems, institutions that historically, especially Western democratic systems, they really underestimate the intelligence and the expertise that comes from lived experience. That's the nature of the beast. And they almost, from even the fathers of representative government, it was about protecting decision-making from the masses. But one of the very exciting developments, certainly in democratic theory and practice in the West, has been about more participatory forms of democracy, where it is actually, especially deliberative, and it's proven again and again and again, if you get a group of people together, and they can come from any walk of life, if you give them just a little bit of time, a little bit of chance to hear from one another across the differences of how we're living issues and seeing these issues, you're going to come up with incredibly informed, ultimately much more effective ideas for how we navigate the world and have solve the problems that we've got. And especially when you have entrenched, polarized, complex issues, getting everyday citizens to get together and have that opportunity to hear from each other and then decide, we solve things so much better in that context. And you also then, of course, get buy-in because people are with you and can see the legitimacy, and it isn't, hyper-politicized and so on. So there's something about invigorating our democratic processes. I mean, all the markers of formal democracy are on decline. People aren't voting, they don't join parties. At the same time as you have a surge of people who are taking to the streets, who are taking other forms of, say, volunteering or other kinds of activism. And the inspiration for that third year course that I designed back in 2019 was, in some ways, the only vocabulary or notes on the piano that we have most commonly for politics is like formal politics, like institutional mechanisms like voting or submissions or whatever, referenda, and then protest like it's one note. And actually there's a million things that people do, and a million even things happening within a given protest that are not even recognized always as political. All the background community organizing and relationship building and all the arts that can sustain and produce and change the way we see the world. All these other aspects to the world that are part of changing and reconstituting the world we're in, how we can make change. So I get excited about that work of helping people to feel their own power, but also developing the arts by which, because I think of these as muscular arts, and we're pretty flabby, because if all you've got is voting every 3 years, one little note here, or like a comment section from your bathrobe at home, where you're not really listening to anybody, you're forced to take rigor, to think outside the personal, private person and think as a citizen, which is like, what do we think? And then protest, which is sometimes a sort of a simple note. It's certainly instant, a fleeting moment, an oppositional moment. Lots of things can happen within it, but it often is, there isn't that sense of sustained engagement that can happen. Often, though, actually within protests, it can happen within that site. So it can become a sheltering site for a more complex politics. But anyway, if you have that as your vocabulary, of course you're not going to, when you have these moments, say a referendum, have those arts at the ready, even thinking civically, like, we together have to figure out what's best for us. Or the arts of listening, the arts of deliberation. So I think we need to build those arts. Those are muscular. We need practice. And so I'm excited about more opportunities for us to discover and develop, I think, the capacities we do have as citizens to make really powerful decisions on our own. But since I've moved here, everything that I would normally strongly advocate for is also quite tempered. Because I think that, and especially in terms of my training and tradition, and a lot of those who are talking about, say, deliberation and other forms of democracy, they're coming from a really Western place, not aware of the deliberative processes, say, and practices that already exist in this place, and presuming to come in and set the context, understand or be the context in which these conversations and changes are happening. And there's a risk of neo-colonization in those moves. So for example, there's pushes for, say, citizens' assemblies here around climate. And some of the conversations that were happening around that, it's a really exciting idea that you can get 100 or so representative citizens together, and then you give them enough time, access to the people they want to talk to as experts in the field, chance to hear from each other. They're going to come up with some pretty amazing ideas that we will all more likely take up. But there was a real conversation when that was proposed here of how that, again, it's like, well, you're going to bring a Western version of that thing here, and you're going to bring it as if it doesn't already exist. And it's all of the values that are within that of a Western world, like speaking as an individual rather than a collective, or what makes someone representative. Is it demographics? Is that really it? Or is it actually because you come from a particular community, and you're responsible to them? And so there's all these real complexities in role, and so I hesitate always about, say, it would have to always go much slower, and I'm never going to be the one to tell you what the idea is. But I feel like part of the work that I've ended up doing is trying to bridge the world that I come from, which is people that are claiming to be experts in, say, deliberation and democracy from the Western tradition, and trying to create channels of accountability and mutual learning, but especially learning among the deliberative folk, for what it means to do that here. And I'm still learning what that means, but I think even being tempered, even that coming in with that humility is itself an intervention that needs to happen. And I've again, through trial and error, learned how important that is. So even in early days when I was advocating for deliberative assemblies here in Aotearoa, I had a few, I still am learning more and more and more the context in which I live and work and think. And I guess I'm learning more and more how little I know and how crucial that is. And so I guess the quandary for me is, yes, I think the big question is how to empower everyday citizens to be more actively engaged in making this world, all asking that question of how should we live, developing the muscles, but doing that in a much more decolonial way and decolonizing way. One of the challenges that I really see replicated in terms of neocolonial aspects of democracy, whether it's voting or it's deliberation, in both settings in this place, you're going to have Pākehā be dominant, right, in numbers. and then culturally dominant, because the most familiar codes for like what makes sense or what sounds reasonable is going to be Pākehā ways, right? So in both those worlds, voting, like people say, oh, you know, people should have a referendum on Three Waters. It's got to be the worst idea ever when you literally have mobilized numbers to have a group of people come in and become dominant. I mean, if we had that conversation in 1852 when we were about 50-50 population, that would be a very different scenario. But one of the key tools of settler colonialism is numbers, just sheer numbers and disease, sheer numbers and disease, and making laws. That's another clever trick. So then you can mobilize majority rule as a weapon. That's what happens in this place. And so the vote, certainly that's true, like a referendum. And a referendum, we know, is like a blunt instrument, just like it's a voting instrument where you don't get to think together and really consider each other's views before you decide. And so you just go on what you already know. But even in deliberation in those spaces, when you're going to have a representative group of people, what does that mean? It means you're going to have more Pākehā people in that room, right? Who affirm that dominant world outside is in that room too, in terms of culture and values and language. So there's a risk of like the democratic tool that we think of as most common as majority rule, right? And that's actually a very recent development since representative democracy and so on. It's not the only tool in the toolkit, but it's definitely not the sum of democracy. But you can actually watch it work to, I think, anti-democratic ends. I think if we're talking about people being empowered to decide how they live, in a meaningful way and having equality and inclusion and a sense of balance, then you are not going to have it happen in this place in a context of settler colonialism. You're not going to have that happen through majority rule, unless we are able to learn from each other, as a process before that, and really, really get transformed by one another in terms of how we see the world before we decide.
With all the provisos of being aware of what you don't know and that sort of thing, I'm just thinking like Three Waters is such an interesting example. And sort of top of mind for me, we've just come back from a holiday zooming around the North Island and seeing all the signs about Three Waters are everywhere. What would you advise if you just had to be the one to say this is how it's going to be, this is the process that we might go through to come to a good decision about how we manage our water infrastructure in the country? What kind of process would you suggest at this point, knowing that you might get it wrong or whatever?
Yeah. I'm not... it's funny, like I think some of the arguments, the biggest arguments against it is it's anti-democratic. And that's why it's good to talk about, how majority rule itself is a weapon. And majority rule, we know also is a tyranny, right, without other measures. And we've always had other measures, including more proportionately more like rural votes versus urban has been different. Like it's not always been one person, one vote in terms of representation in New Zealand, because we know that it's not fair. Easily we lose certain views, they're crowded out. But the thing that also I think gets really lost in this context is Te Tiriti is the context for democracy. So that's what enables democracy to even be here. Right? So that's the Kawanatanga side, where you're like, okay, we're going to choose democracy as a way to organize ourselves. That's empowered because of that right that was given in 1840 for non-Māori to govern themselves. And so ultimately the question is Three Waters able to honor Te Tiriti? And that being the precursor for even any kind of question about democracy. But there's lots of stuff we don't decide. That's why I think it's really interesting. And I think it is sometimes veiled. It is often veiled, racism or reactionism to decolonization, which is underway. Exciting, wonderful movements are underway. And we get to be part of them, but we also can see the backlash. That's always going to be the death pangs and birth pangs of change. But yeah, the mobilization of it, I think about when we use that, it's often when there is... Yeah, what a cool thing to even see the normalization of Maori sovereignty and authority and sorry, what I'm getting a bit fumbly. You're asking a big question.
I guess I'm asking not to decide about what do we do about Three Waters, but would you at this point in your thinking advise citizens that we should have some citizens assemblies around the country? And
I do really trust deliberative processes. To be able to get somewhere in terms of deepening our own sense of knowledge. Like Mika's heard me use the metaphor of the blind man and the elephant. Do you know that story?
Yeah.
So that's, for me, it absolutely encapsulates why democracy at its best can be such an incredible tool, that all of us get enlarged vision by holding one small piece of the puzzle and by bringing them together and getting to see the bigger picture.
If we can somehow listen to the others.
Right. But I'm currently working with Ngāti Toa Runanga and a group called The People Speak, who are all Tauiwi, non-Māori group. They're climate activists, and they've been wanting to make a TDT-led climate assembly, and they've paired with trying to figure out how to do it for the Wellington region. We weren't getting any purchase, and then the CEO of Ngāti Tuarunanga, Helmut Modlik, was like, "Yes, I've been writing about how we need to reinvigorate Democracy 2.0 anyway. Let's team up." So they've been in a process of trying to actually figure out what it means to make a version of that form for this place. What does it actually look like to be TDT led? And it looks really different. It has to look really different. And so I wouldn't want to, I think about how the cultural values and the protocols that are embedded in something that's, say, a more familiar citizens assembly, they end up replicating some of the problems that mean certain views get privileged, even if we're trying hard not to. So that's where I would hesitate again about how it's designed is really going to be important. Going slow to go fast, I think, is really going to be important. But who decides is the question in this context. I guess that's what you were making me think about, is who ultimately decides. If we can shift that over time more and more and realize that actually that no one's losing out by sharing power and upholding Maori authority. No one loses out, actually. The sense of us and them, and the sense of like a scarcity mindset that you think things are getting taken away from you. I think it's going to uplift everyone the more we do that. And so I just get it's exciting to see, for example, all the Maori words that are coming out, but that's just a tiny, tiny step in the direction of actually having balance in decision making when these things are shared in common. But the more that we can actually share that power, I think the more we're going to see rightful relationships, good decision making. But it's not going to be I actually don't think it's for people like me to decide when it's coming to these questions of who's actually upholding the authority of Maori to make decisions this way. I'm excited to see that government and other, these moves to actually honor that, which is part of clearing the gorse. It's very exciting to see. So I'm not going to predict, or I guess I'm getting more and more out of the habit of trying to be the expert about something. Do you know what I mean? I'm inherently really curious about a lot of things. I care about a lot of things, but I actually think more and more it's not going to be people like me that should ever answer those questions. Yeah. But I guess I just want to front the intense hope and intense optimism and the vision of the future that we all get to be part of if we can more and more cede control. Ani Mikaide, I don't know if you've ever read the piece Are We All New Zealanders Now? Did you ever read that?
No, I've read some of her other work, but I haven't read that. Yeah,
that one is... there's this beautiful, at the end of that piece, she's talking about, people who've claimed indigeneity, Pākehā and so on, and how that's a way of hiding out from things. And she talks about how in terms of justice and her own tikanga, and Māori tikanga would be to, if someone does something wrong, the other party as a collective cedes control. The one who is wronged gets to decide what to take in return or what's fair. But the ceding control itself is actually what restores honor for both parties. And it's the very opposite of what Pākehā do. We just hold on to control, and we want to be the experts, and we want to future-proof. That's a cultural habit and especially in this place, is a real cultural habit. Need to be right, need to be the knower, need to be certain. And the desire for the universal, right? The abstracted universal truth. And the more we can relax that muscle, I think the more we restore honor, we find justice. And so that's the thing I get excited about, is how we actually all are going to be uplifted by a world where we learn to relax those hands a little bit and properly share. Yeah.
You've talked a little bit about deliberative democracy and deliberative practices, and that's one of the things that when taking your course last year I found really quite awesome. Could you just briefly explain what deliberative democracy is, a bit about how it works, and...
Should I test you?
Why you have trust in that? I mean, you could do. I just did that in Jonathan Oosterman's course, as well as a way of how can deliberative democracy be a way in which we can respond to climate change, with looking at citizens' assemblies worldwide, and how often citizens' assemblies with just people from all walks of life getting together make far more radical recommendations on climate than governments do. And then you have the issue of governments then going, oh, that's a bit scary. That's not, and it's not a binding recommendation, so the government can just cherry pick the parts of it that are easy or palatable.
Yeah, that's right.
And almost it seems like in some cases deliberative democracy and citizens' assemblies aren't used because it's a way of democratically legitimizing a decision, it's almost a threat
Yes.
to this sort of
Yeah.
established democracy. So I guess how does deliberative democracy work, and how can you sort of overcome some of those barriers and work towards implementing that? And why do you trust
Big
it?
questions. There's enough evidence that better, more informed, more just, and more effective decisions come from those kinds of processes that it seems just so clear to me. In the New Zealand context, there's lots of examples. Matiki Mai Aotearoa, how it was made, is a great example of like a nationwide hui's. I think, including the rangiteki ones, it was over 300. And then distilling from that key recommendations or orienting values and so on. Beautiful examples of one of the most recent of many examples from the Maori context. But in the Pākehā world here, and this is true of most liberal democracies, again because they're historically distrustful of citizens and the discernment of them, the knowledge of them. You have to protect democracy from, ironically, was it John Stuart Mill who proposed that certain votes, people should get their vote weighted differently based on their knowledge, like their education and so on. So there's all these like historical, there's a deep sense that people shouldn't be trusted. It's just ironic, over time, that of course you end up with a system where people don't trust, government or feel engaged, disengaged, if you get disaffected, take that energy elsewhere. So yeah, there's lots of evidence that it works. Thinking about your specific questions. One thing I have noticed is, to make overgeneralizations as someone who's coming from outside, I had a meeting with one MP who was trying to figure out whether to have a citizens assembly, and here and trying to experiment with it, and thinking about what I've learned about sort of risk aversion as sort of maybe a cultural trait as well, but also historically, there's a real move to either the referendum, which is quite a blunt instrument, as I said. It's like, what do you all think now? Yes or no? It's such a blunt instrument. But also turning to expert advisory groups. So very much they can deliberate, but let's choose the experts and they'll decide for us. And so there's a sense of passing the baton and not a sense of even experience of. And this is where I think, people like John Dewey and others say, and Brian Berry talk about how everyday life is the university for this stuff. Like you need to experience it, have lots of different experiences of it, work the muscle, right? And get honed and get tight and realize, this is, I'm going to come in better this time. And it is muscular. So you need lots of practice. We don't have practice. So you have a government that historically doesn't have really proof of concept and is quite averse to risk it, to find out. And I think, generally then there's not a lot of opportunities for citizens to feel their own power, or that this is a way to be oriented to, that they could be a part of, that maybe the experts should decide. And so there's this sort of, this gap, this real, it feels like a lot of wind moving through that area that could be full of places where people converge and talk in a more informal or formal ways about what's the world that they want to live in. So there's a lot of barriers, but I think it is, risk aversion and not being able to see it. I think the proof is in the experience of it. When you do it, when you experience it, even how you've ever had deep conversations or meeting people across real difference in a real way, you can feel the difference of how much sharper and clearer and deeper your thinking can be because of being able to come up against one another. So we just need more experiences of that, how it is effective. So there is currently the Ngāti Toa Runanga CEO says, we can be the proof. If we do this right, it could actually be a testament to something that's possible. And others say, Orohe will have to find their own version of that thing. But the proof is going to maybe be in the doing and in the experience of it, and how you can feel the qualitative difference of what we come to. There's lots of great evidence around the world, though, about how, Ireland everyone loves to point to right now because they, in a place historically deeply polarized, never shall meet, right, across those big differences. In the context of their citizens' assembly over a year, they tackled so many different issues, but one of them was abortion, is that right? And it was binding, so they were able to put that directly to the populace. And there are lots of examples where it is binding. You can decide. But because they had this process, and then they actually did follow it up with some really great campaigning, from people that were involved, saying this is why we came to this decision, this is how we came to this decision, because that's quite key, how you connect to the broader public. But they actually were able to change policy no one thought would be able to be changed in Ireland, and it was because of that assembly. And they actually, and similarly, they have some push with the climate, the findings on the referendum, the Citizens Assembly on Climate there, where they have had some kind of commitment to take up those recommendations. So yeah, it's about buy-in, it's about trust, it's taking a risk, but the proof will come through the doing, I think.
Yeah, I've found, looking at some of the studies of deliberative democracy for the climate course that I did, the way in which people's minds can change as well, just through being in relationship with one another, and the way you get people who are like, don't care or are skeptic, who then sort of engage with people who are a lot younger or who are just like quite radically different, and then you just like the perspective change through that authentic relationship, I think is like quite a beautiful thing, which is really lacking in a system where you just vote every 3 years.
Yeah, and what's truly needed, that's such a zero-sum game. And this is about, you need massive buy-in, and you need us to be able to take bold and quite creative steps and understand why. You really need some kind of broad consensus to make this happen, but quickly. Yeah, so in that process, the only thing is there's a new work called Democracy Without Shortcuts. And of course, academics cannibalize themselves, like they're always self-critiquing. And so this beautiful book, Democracy Without Shortcuts, makes the important point that a deliberative assembly in some ways is a shortcut, because you get an avatar of the community and they get the opportunity. But really important to how you connect that up to the broader community. But is it actually that we need everyone in some ways to be brought along in a more deep way? But again, the speed of these things, in terms of being able to get broad consensus, how much slower that would be. But you're right, the change that's possible. You actually can come to places of compromise. You can come to see some place in the middle you'd never imagined existed because you're actually hearing from one another. And that it's very exciting. One of my favorite examples that I probably shared with you from the New Zealand context was about pre-birth testing. So it touches on religious convictions and, abortion issues and so on. And similarly, the people that ran that project across the country, how do people feel about pre-birth testing? They realized that despite across those differences, everyone wanted to minimize abortions, right? So it's like we had this thing in the middle where we could agree, well, how can we build for that? And so the question itself changes about how to approach solution. Only by virtue of coming together. But they were actually able to, he charted how much change, I've heard him give this talk a couple times, how much change in perspective by the benefit of hearing from each other. And that's what we need, right? We need to bring people with us.
Who was that? Sorry?
Simon Wright, and their project's called The Listening. I'll find it for you. But Simon Wright and John Pennington were running it, and it was under the prior Labour government. And it was one of the few miracles where it was funded to be able to run across the country. And they ran it in schools and in Rotary clubs or whatever it might be. People from all walks of life coming in to talk about this thing. And it was, powerful.
I feel like I've seen those names. Maybe there was some kind of deliberative thing about, or Citizens Assembly about water infrastructure up north or in Auckland.
They might, I'm not sure.
Might have been them.
Koitu, you might be thinking about. They've just been running a water Citizens Assembly up in Tamaki.
That'll be the one.
Yeah.
I also noticed recently Ministry of Transport ran a consultation using Polis, the online software, about how the National Land Transport funding thing should work. I thought that was a really interesting small step in this kind of deliberative, how do we find those surprising common stuff in the middle things?
Yeah.
Do you see much potential for the online world?
Does Polis, is it conducive to that?
It's amazing. I love Polis. It has never succeeded.
What do you mean?
Has never succeeded to the extent that it should. I'm on the board of Lumio. I don't know if you know Lumio. Which has never succeeded to the extent that it ought to get the kind of change that we want to see.
It's a change maker. It's been a change maker and key to change.
It has, but not enough.
Yeah.
And Polis is the same. Like Polis, you put in statements. Anyone can put in a statement, and the rest of the people participating can agree or disagree with it. And so you're sort of incentivized to write statements that you get as much as possible of the group to agree with, and it does somehow surface, unlike Twitter or Facebook and things that somehow surface polarizing stuff. You somehow find the middle. It's been used cleverly in Taiwan and elsewhere to help inform policy writing. But I just wonder, for yourself, do you see much potential in the online world and apps and things for making some of this stuff happen?
I mean, there's other people that study the digitization of, how it plays into social movements and politics. That's less, I actually work in the online space quite a bit, but in terms of a different project, I do think that there's something synergetic that happens when we get to be in person. And that is, especially when it's about letting oneself be affected and maybe changed by what we are hearing. I don't think there's any surrogate for that in person. It's too easy to put on your armor and to think you already know and to not really listen. Like, I feel really sorry for students that are coming through in COVID and thinking that listening to a recording of us talking to a room that they're not even in is somehow the same as them getting an education, and they listen on 1.5 speed. I know you do it. It breaks my heart, but I'm not able to I'm not able to feel what's going on with you. I'm not able to respond to that. We're not able to find what else could be here because we're all in this incredible space of the classroom, which I think is a civics deliberative space. Yeah, so there's something really sad about the way that and you're multitasking. I mean, how many screens do you have open, or, things you've got going on when you're half listening to a lecture or whatever it might be. So that dynamic is too easy. And I think this is hard work, especially in terms of thinking beyond oneself, bringing oneself in, but being present to that. So even studies of deliberation, there's a colleague Morrill, who writes about, there's studies that have tried to track when we go into our automatic thinking versus deliberative thinking, when we're actually open to change or new views. And actually in deliberation, we're mainly in automatic. So it's actually it's very, very rare when you're actually able to contend with what's foreign and different and be changed by it, be better for it. And so, you have to guard those spaces. I don't think we can... Yeah, there's something irreplaceable in the in-person.
It's been a big theme among the academics that we've interviewed about the sense of what's been lost over the online learning. It's been big.
Yeah, I feel the students don't know what it... it's a self-fulfilling thing, because then they don't come. And I feel really sad that's the only version that they know. And I know part of it is just expedience, just the way it's got to be. But for the sake of mental health, for the sake of feeling a community around you, but also the learning. Like, I remember when I was first learning in political theory, especially political theory where it's like, what is the world? And how does that relate to what I already think? And is that true? I don't know if that's true. That process, I remember as someone trying to explain to me, the pauses are really key. Actually, especially in podcasts, when I listen, it's like things are going too, it's gestating, and it's actually working on us, and we're letting ourselves be something other than we were a minute ago if we let there be. This dynamic of even emphasizing it as a product that you're somehow downloading, it gets back to that really traditional model of teaching too, where you're transmitting something, and it might work for content-based courses, but not when you're talking about what's the world you want to live in. There's something that I feel is quite lost, and I know partly it's just the love of being with students, right? I know we miss that, you too, deeply, and we miss the experience of what it is to teach when we get to have people in a room together, but there is something that is not being taught, that is not being learned, because we aren't working that way anymore, I think. But we're all working with what we got.
Back a little while ago, you mentioned in one of your courses, you talked about maybe 10 genres of action that works to get at structural change. And I'm just interested in what are some of the 10?
We play, they're not exhaustive as a list, but it's a way of thinking about affordances and slight different accents on the kinds of action we take and the trade-offs therein. So conceptual division rather than like actual strategic division sometimes. They often happen at the same time, or one enables the other, but it allows us to think about them in a particular way. And the contrast, every week we do 2, and for example, art and argument. So do you try to transform views through the power of the evocative, emotive, visceral visual image, for example, or do you or music, or all these other art forms, or do you try to use a carefully worded submission to counsel? So what is it to make change in those 2 ways? Are you trying to work through institutional and non-institutional means? That's another easy distinction. Are you trying to work in opposition, like what's often called a disruptive politics? So you're trying to make it hard, you're making the seamless flow of an unjust world more difficult? Or are you trying to work in a more educative way where it's like, let's try to change the way you think about that world? And again, one can house the other, one enables the other, but they sometimes are at odds. What are the other distinctions we've got? Spectacle and everyday organizing. So we often valorize the really visible public moments, and especially the particular, often male figures that are leading a spectacular moment in protest politics, say. but often held by a lot of the women, like in the civil rights movement and so on, but and using a different model of leadership, which is horizontal. There's so much background organizing that's always happening, and relationship building and going door to door, and so many cups of tea, and both preceding and also following any kind of eruptive, overly public moment that itself is also fleeting and ephemeral, and therefore needs these ways of bringing it back in and coming from the community. So there's those kinds of just distinctions, and they're and I'm trying to think what the fifth one is. Did I do 5? But one of the things we did with that course, which I get really excited about, is, and I think it's the only course that in all of our program actually centers citizens, students, like we are political. What does that mean? It's the only, and in the third year as well, as people step into the world, we did a study of people's sense of agency before and after, and then 6 months later as well. And it's just exciting to feel that students not only have a language for the way structural issues work, which is also not something we're not very good at talking about in politics. Like, a language itself is empowering. That is agency, to be able to say, that's how systems work. Okay, well, these are the points of intervention. These are things that might be leveraged. These are things, beautiful power that comes from being able to see that in a particular way. But then so many students would say, I didn't ever think that I could have agency in this, but I have all these forms of action available to me. Some of them I'm already using. I didn't even think about them in this way. It's very exciting to see students step out, especially in this moment where it's just a devastating world, and we're not very good at talking. Yeah, we're not very good at this, supporting students in a practical sense. Hey, like you said, we're really good at picking it apart and not very good at knowing how to be equipped to act. But yeah, that was exciting to me, that we have this beautiful, a very short window, but we get to actually hopefully create some kind of sense that you can actually change this world around you. And then nuance around when and if and how and in what moment this is effective or that. So it's not that those are always inherently useful. It's actually, now we have a language. When do I use which for what kind of theory of change? Yeah.
You mentioned a bit earlier at the start and partway through about, did you say performative theatre as a way to challenge inequality and injustice? How does that work?
So I've just finished the manuscript this week, like the revised version, so I can give you the super verbose version. One of the things I noticed within a lot of the politically engaged theatre and dance are the two genres that I study the most. But generally, the use of music, all the beautiful aesthetics that are part of any kind of protest, etc., is... Well, for one thing, they're not talked about in politics very much, and yet they're used around the world, especially by marginalized positions, to form new coalitions, to re-signify identities, to assert agency when there is otherwise no channel, and actually to challenge dominant culture and dominant groups really effectively, and can resonate and not just be heard in a way that, say, argument or evidence or getting in the street and putting up a sign or whatever it is doesn't do all the time. When we get into these spaces where you're actually with the complexity and artistry of being able to represent particular issues in aesthetic ways, you're going to have them resonate and break through. Especially, I started to identify, well, what are the ways that art's working that we can actually name? Like, what's going on in there that helps art to do this in these moments? So one of the cases I look at is in the South African apartheid context, theatre was used as like the number one form of cultural resistance. And it not only was able to be present in an aggressive apartheid state that was cracking down on all resistance, but in fact it flourished. So, like, how did that happen? And it's now seen as a big part of how South Africa was able to, move to a post-apartheid world and actually democratize. So what's happening there? And across, there's I'm so indebted to many of the people that, of course, are writing at that time about theatre, because it's an ephemeral art, so you're in an aggressive apartheid context. So it's amazing that we're able to know as much as we are. But the way that identities were being represented, the way that struggles were being represented on stage in such complexity, with such affective intensity. So it's being able to move you in spite of what you think you know, because of the immediacy and the incredible art of that depiction. It enables people to be transformed that they wouldn't otherwise be. And then at the same time, so we're seeing identities and issues and the world represented in altogether new ways that themselves are complex, not reduced to stereotypes, which itself is being what's challenged. Because art is complex, it's never going to be just one thing. It's like everyone in the audience feels differently. We're tempered even in our sense of, do you see it differently? I see it differently. Like all of us often walk this world thinking we see it all. And in the aesthetic context, you can never claim that. So that I think is a highly democratic resource in itself, of just being very explicit that we're all interpreting the world and we all only have one piece. But there's a different way of signifying who we are and what we're living in that's powerful, but it also, you can connect across really broad audiences. In the South African context, they were able to roam around townships and in places where there was no other, even language barriers across South Africa, certainly overseas, but because of movement, because of dance, because the songs would get in your head and you keep singing them and you couldn't stop and they would come home with you. The one person that was the apartheid state was like, we got to stop this guy. Gives him Kent. It was actually, he had quite tame musicals, but it was because the music itself was potent, right? So even just a little glimmer of something else, another world, and what could be possible. And the use of metaphor, the use of symbolism means you could say something without having to say it. So you could slide through censorship. You could actually code switch or use bodily movement so that some police officer in the crowd couldn't actually pin you down, or you could communicate to a crowd just by using association of a certain image or a flag present, or I put on a certain prop when I use a certain language to do a certain thing. It was a code, like using the aesthetics as a way to communicate in a way that direct literal language couldn't do. You would absolutely have that cracked down. You wouldn't even have scripts at some certain stages. And then there's this power in it too, like being able to gather. It's another civic space. And it's a space of explicit critique and imagination. It's designed to slow the world down enough that you can see it in a different way and have a chance, like a breath, to say, well, do we want it to be? How else could it be? And then, so there's this great example. I mean, there's so many great examples, but there's one where during protests, people would use theater and enact, like the police officers would come and the protesters would confront them. And they were all actors, and they did or didn't know, I'm not sure at this moment, but they would emerge and they would enact the scene where this really nervous crowd expecting the real police would be about to arrive, and they would have witnessed and experienced this moment, this prefigurative moment of a world where the police backed down because we were courageous enough. And then they would dissipate and they would come up elsewhere in the crowd, and they would do it again and again until the police came, and it was like you had a completely different crowd, right? So there's this power of being able to imagine, to practice even together in a relatively slightly more safe space, of a liminal space of the theater, right? Of saying we're going to pause, we're going to suspend our disbelief, right? We're going to play with norms, we're going to play with what the world could be. Let's see if, what happens now? What could be? So it's this beautiful space that is, because it's liminal, because it's not claiming to force a certain change right now, certain things are possible in that context that in a really powerful way. So anyway, I could go on. I mean, I literally just sat down and wrote how many pages about this. So I don't know if that was a bit too rambly, but I get excited about counter what we think politics is, and also we desperately need ways of being able to meet in our differences and be able to, all of our habits of meeting, I reduce you to something I already know to make sense of you. Like, I only recognize you when you speak my language. So what is it to really meet, and how hard and rare that moment is? And so I get excited about the way that the arts are so masterful at able to hold the complexity and the ambiguity and the open-endedness of, like, all of us see something different and it's all a little bit right but not fully true, right? That explicit sign that we're always mediating and that there's a gap between your experience and my knowledge of it. Like, that's really at the fore with the arts. So I think there's real resources there that we don't yet recognize for political life.
Do you go to many theatre shows in Wellington?
Yeah.
And
do you?
In the theatre?
Yeah.
I've been to a few, but I don't think I've been here for long enough to really engage with the theatre scene. Yeah. But I've been to a few and I've really enjoyed them. Have you had any favourites in the past few years? Well,
it'd be good. I work a lot with Barbarian Productions, who are one of the most wonderful politically engaged theatre clown companies. And every work they make is trying to help communities across the country have conversations that we need to have but avoid. So it's like about inequality, or they did a great one where they surveyed, there's so many examples to give you, Sing It to My Face, where because generations weren't talking to each other, they did a survey around the country and said, what do you think of your generation and everybody else? They wrote a libretto They go to communities. There's been like 4 or 5 cities where you ask volunteers to say, would you like to be a part of the choir? And you break them into the generations. And you actually have them say the things that nobody says in this beautiful human way. The complexity of it, you're like, everyone's boastful and undone and judgy and grateful, and all the complexities of the stereotyping of one another and the gratitude to one, you know, all of that complexity across generations. The things we never say. They have this sing it to my face intervention. It's brilliant. There's another, there's so many ones to talk about. Soft and Hard gets into gender dynamics. White Elephant was about socioeconomic inequality. Captain Cook Thinks Again is where you actually walk the waterfront of Te Whanganui-a-Tara with Captain Cook, who's a clown comedian, very talented, Tom Clark. And he's initially very jovial and hilarious, and of course you get brought in because it's funny, and you know it seems very non-confrontational. But by the end of the tour, precisely because he doesn't confront you or demand you change your mind, but you witness him coming to realize after he's had 250 years to think about it, and he's a changed man by the end, talking about his and the complex and very fraught history that he began. He's deeply responsible for, and we all are responsible for. So by virtue of this indirect way of working, you're not arguing with me, you're not demanding I change my mind. I'm witnessing a fiction as it unfolds. There's humor involved. That is what enables change. And so anyway, I find Barbarian Productions is just one to keep an eye out for. They're amazing.
They'll need to do one about Three Waters, perhaps.
Maybe.
A friend of mine is doing
The Time.
Yes, we'll ask about hope, perhaps. I'll just say that a friend of mine is doing one on restorative justice and looking at the criminal justice system, and the play is a boy who's going through a restorative justice process and with like, I think, family or people that he's hurt, and sort of really like humanizing him like through the play, in spite of the crimes that he's committed, to sort of challenge our ideas of a punitive criminal justice system and looking at a more restorative one through theatre and like what engagement like that could look like. So there's another way to have some of those really cool conversations.
Yeah, restorative justice is a frame that really takes a complex relational view on And I've learned a lot from restorative justice mediators in my work, because what I study is how to encourage listening where it's needed. A real practical question is in what I do, how to encourage listening among advantaged groups to structural claims. That's what I study. I learned a lot from various conflict mediators, therapists, performers, and to TDT educators, and just said, what do you know that we could bring into our politics? And that restorative justice was a great resource for that. Hey, that deep, very whole people in whole contexts are present as you meet, which is a rare orientation.
We just wanted to ask, in light of all of these discussions about democratic engagement and democracy generally, and some of the issues that you've highlighted, where do you find hope in all of that? Or what gives you hope personally?
I do get really excited about the vision into Te Reo Waitangi. I get really excited. I think that future is possible. It's happening. There's actually a ticking clock right now for 2040 to make that real. And it's such a concrete, vivid vision in which all of us can thrive in our differences and with dignity and live in peace together and with honor, restored honor for everyone. So that gives me a lot of hope. I also am just inspired by all the actors who are a part of things. A lot of the work I do is actually less academic and more civic. So I work with Action Station quite a lot. The group that I started, Tauiwi Tautoko, was initially started by Action Station that I run now. And getting to connect with amazing organizations like them. I mean, I just did a piece with Inclusive Aotearoa Tahono and Amnesty and Action Station. The four of us did a open letter about the government's pulling back on its plans to fulfill UNDRIP, and just like the lovely opportunities to collaborate. The work that I do on the ground with Tauiwi Tautoko, it's a growing community of volunteers who just are really committed to a decolonial and TTT-based future. Tauiwi, and this amazing group of people that just keeps growing because they're out there and they're just coming to join this community of people who are really committed to and really not fearful but really excited about the future that holds for us. A TTT-based future, and getting to connect as human beings in a community has been a huge source of hope. Like, wow, about prefigurative politics. Hey, you must have talked about that in the series. Did you ever talk about it?
So.
That's the last juxtaposition: strategic and prefigurative politics. So it's prefigurative politics. Strategic politics is really about leveraging what you've got to get what you want. And prefigurative politics is usually juxtaposed with that, because prefigurative, it's less about using whatever means to get your end than it is about living the future you want right now, prefiguring the future. And in that way, it's very ethical. I mean, it's also like, don't compromise your ethics to get, the peaceful resistance movement is prefigurative politics. But it also, it makes the future that you want in the moment, in that particular moment. And I do think about theater sometimes as prefigurative. Certainly, all these moments when we get to come together, restorative justice is prefigurative, where you get to actually make the world that we're all also a part of making on a broader scale. And that is invigorating. It gives me so much hope. It gives me so much energy to feel how many people are a part of that, a part of making those worlds and building relationships there. And I do have to say that I get really excited, really inspired by our students. I do think that things are on fire in a really good way in this place. And I think that often students need more from us as instructors than we're trained and prepared to give in terms of meeting what this moment is, in terms of climate, in terms of decolonization. I get all of it, a real commitment to justice, and the beautiful impatience that comes with being younger, but getting to have those conversations in the classroom, getting to feel that energy and be part of building something together with students always gives me hope. I'm sure you hear that a lot, eh? We always rely on the next generation. I always think that's about deferral. It's our responsibility too, but there's a lot of hope that comes from that. I'm so honored to be in this place, being a part of these pieces of work that are intergenerational, lifelong and intergenerational. And so that gives me hope that I get to be a part of it and the people that I meet along the way. Sorry, I don't have a better answer for you.
That was an excellent answer. So appreciate your time this afternoon, Emily.
Yeah.
So appreciate it. It's been wonderful.
Yeah. I'd love to hear more about listening and some of the study you've done into that as well, because I think that really plays into making deliberative democracy work. But maybe we'll have to talk about that some other time.
Yeah, I'm always happy to talk about that. That's all the work.
We didn't even really cover Tauiwi Tōtoko.
To be honest, one thing I've discovered is I mentioned it, is I realized that work, it's easy to get cynical about what it is, and if it's an anti-racist training and then community, and it's only people that are committed to being a part of it that do it on their own time. It's all volunteer. But if people thought of us more as an organization, it's easy to then get cynical. It's like, they're just... So the less we're known as a name and the more we're known by the authentic interactions people are having online and in their own lives. So all we do is, honestly, even the approach we develop is it's all about you just being... It's literally just putting a little bit in your toolkit to be authentically yourself, talking, calling in ways that we know work. But it's better to not talk about it, I think.
Nice.
Yeah. But just keep, by word of mouth, getting more and more people to be a part of the community is great.
It's like the anti-fight club.
And the anti-fight club. Someone was, the person who started us, Laura O'Connor-Rapara, who was the head of Action Station at the time, said it's an army... something like a love army or something like that. Luckily we dropped the militant metaphors, but but there's something about listening as a martial art is a metaphor that runs through all the work I do, and it's because of learning from people like Chris Marshall and so many others. And listening itself disarms, it diffuses, it gets you on the back foot, it creates softening, you feel heard such that you're able to listen, but also, so it's this incredible using what's present to make change possible. Like, it's the opposite of much activism. Although, to be fair, especially around everyday organizing side of politics, of activism, listening is a martial art. It's practiced all the time. But I've been articulating it a little bit differently and using it more explicitly in the last couple of years in our work. But yeah, it is. It's a martial art. Listening is a powerful tool. Hey, when we want opening and shift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.